Recently, my son and daughter-in-law attempted to buy their first house. They were married not quite 2 years ago, and during that time they both got great jobs, and they had been living in a really small one-room apartment. And so they were thinking this would be the time to start looking to buy their first house and have a little bit more space for themselves and their dog. Thankfully, that one-bedroom apartment enabled them to save up for a down payment, and they got approved for a loan, and they started putting out offers on houses. Then we began to pray. They were praying. A lot of different people were praying. And yet, as they put in offer after offer on a variety of houses, every time someone else beat them out. Part of the problem is we're in a really difficult housing market right now in our area in 2023, where a buyer will list their house, a seller will list their house, and then buyers will come out of the woodwork putting in all kinds of offers, many of which are above asking price. And so home after home after home, my son and daughter-in-law were beat out by another buyer. It got to a point where they heard the word no so many times that they had to resign themselves to the fact that it might not happen now. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're going through a difficult situation where you're looking for a change. You have hope for something new, but you just keep hitting a brick wall. We all go through those difficulties in life, and they test our patience. They can lead us to actually give up hope. What we're going to see today is a situation where there is hope. Now, in the last few devotionals, we have been leading up to the end of the book of Jeremiah, and today I think we're going to be able to finish it. I have to admit that this study of the life and ministry of Jeremiah has been a difficult one. The entire context of the book is devastating. The nation of Israel is about to be destroyed by Babylon, and it's their fault. They have rebelled against God repeatedly and ignored the warning of the prophets, and now God is tearfully allowing them to face the consequences of the covenant that they have broken with Him. It seems like hope is lost. So how will Jeremiah end? To get to the end, we're going to have to cover 4 chapters today, but I think we can do it, and here's how. First of all, we're going to summarize chapter 49, then we're going to peek ahead to chapter 52, the very end, but we're really going to focus on those middle 2 chapters, 50 and 51. So, for the last few weeks, we've been studying the final section of the book of Jeremiah. It is a series of prophetic poems about the nations around the nation of Israel. Now we come to chapter 49. It's a very, very short chapter with a series of 5 poems about 5 nations. And it follows the exact same pattern that we have seen, and we saw it last week in chapter 48 about Moab. Basically, the message of the poems is this: the nations are arrogantly self-deceptive, and Babylon is coming to destroy them. But in the end, God says that of those 5 nations, He will restore some of their fortunes, the Ammonites and the Elamites, and He says He's going to protect the orphans and the widows of the Edomites. And in this we see our God is a God of restoration. His heart beats for the vulnerable. And so as you and I desire to have hope in God in the midst of difficult circumstances, we look for God to be a God of restoration, a God who is seeking after those that are marginalized. We follow the justice of God for them. Now, like I said, we're going to skip over the middle chapters and take just a quick glance at chapter 52. Basically, the book of Jeremiah finishes with a historical account of the fall of the city of Jerusalem. We hear a bit about the exiles and a few words about Judah's final king, exiled king, Jehoiachin. So, because most of that is a retelling of what we already studied in chapter 39 as well as some other Old Testament chapters, we're going to just skip over that. Feel free to read it, but what we want to focus on is chapters 50 and 51, the final prophetic poem, and this time it's for the Babylonians. It's very similar in the sense that its message is that the nation will be attacked and destroyed. But this time, instead of Babylon doing the attacking, Babylon gets attacked. This section, though, chapters 50 and 51, this long poem for Babylon, has a unique feature that the other poems didn't have. It contains numerous messages for Israel. So we're going to try and pay special attention to those messages for Israel. Let's begin chapter 50, verses 1 through 3, and we learn that the great attacker, the nation of Babylon, will herself be attacked. We think referring to the nation of Persia in the north. Was another regional superpower. Now, God says, Babylon, you will be attacked. And he has something very specific to say. He says that Babylon's gods will be put to shame and filled with terror. In other words, Babylon's gods are going to be shown as false, powerless. And that's a reference that is especially important to the peoples of the ancient Near East, because when two nations in that region waged war against each other, the battle was very much seen as a contest between their gods. And so when the Babylonians swept through the region, just decimating everyone in their path, all of the people, including the Babylonians, could think that their gods were the most powerful. That is perhaps partly why the people of Judah seem to have so easily fallen prey to worshiping the gods of the Babylonians. Maybe their God wasn't as powerful as the ancient Babylonian gods. Maybe their God, who apparently had done all of this wonderful stuff in the distant past, maybe he couldn't do that anymore. Or maybe these Babylonian gods were always superior. Well, in chapter 50, verses 1 through 3, God says, let me tell you the truth here. Those seemingly all-powerful Babylonian deities, they are going to be revealed for the shams that they are. Persia is coming. That message should be really instructive for the people of God from Israel and Judah. Their God is Yahweh, the one true God. And so it makes sense that after declaring that he is the true God, that he is more powerful than the Babylonian gods, that he now does actually have some specific words in this poem for Israel and Judah. In verses 4 through 7, God says that when Babylon is attacked, when her gods are put to shame, then the people of Israel and Judah will tearfully turn and seek God. This will be the first time in centuries that the people of God are depicted as being together. Centuries before, right after the reign of King Solomon, the nation was embroiled in civil war and split between the north and the south. Israel in the north, Judah in the south. Now God says that they will come together in unification to return to him. It's an astounding unification that's taking place, but it's not just the joy of that reuniting of God's people. It's why they're going to be unified. Together, God says that they will turn toward Zion, which is the name of the holy city of Jerusalem. And more so, they will then bind themselves to God in an everlasting covenant. This is a powerful image of a new covenant between God and his people. God is saying that the people are like sheep who are lost. They actually were led astray by bad shepherds who were the kings and the priests and the prophets of the people who led the people to worship false gods. But now, even after that, God says a new day is coming. A day of hope, a day of restoration. Then the poem turns again to Babylon. In verses 8 through 16, we read all about the destruction of Babylon, and following that, there's another message for Israel. God says that though his people are like those scattered sheep who are lost, he's going to be the good shepherd who will bring them back to Palestine, to the promised land, to the land of plenty and abundance and flourishing. And he says, in those days, there will be no more sign of Israel and Judah's sin because he will forgive the remnant. In these verses, God's action is the feature. He restores Israel. He forgives sin. What we're hearing from God is an astounding vision of hope, restoration, forgiveness, safety, peace, so that the people can have flourishing, and He does it. He is active. I wonder if by now you've started to see a pattern emerge. I hinted at it earlier when I said that this particular prophetic poem is unique among the others at the end of the book of Jeremiah. It does have a message of destruction for Babylon. That's unique because they were the ones who were doing all the destroying before. But God embeds within this poem messages for Israel. And He does so in a cyclical pattern. We've seen 2 cycles so far. Babylon will be destroyed. Israel has hope. Babylon will be destroyed. Israel will be restored. Well, now a 3rd cycle begins. In verse 21, we see a section of destruction for Babylon. But then in verses 33 and 34, more blessing will be poured out on Israel. In fact, He reminds them that He is their Redeemer God. He's the Lord Almighty. He will save them. Again, we see the action of God to defend them and bring rest to them. That was cycle 3. Cycle 4 is in chapter 50, verses 35 through chapter 51, verse 4. More judgment against Babylon and more assurance to Israel and Judah. Now this time He reminds them that it was their guilt that caused their downfall, but He is not going to forsake them. He is the Lord Almighty. He is the powerful one. Then we come to cycle 5. In chapter 51, verses 6 through 9, God will break Babylon, and He declares that He will vindicate Zion, the city of Jerusalem. Cycle 6 is up next in verses 11 through 18. More about Babylon's downfall. In verse 19, He says He is the God, the portion of Jacob, the Maker, the Lord Almighty. It's the 3rd time He's called Himself that. An indication that He wants us to pay attention that He is the Almighty God. And He describes Israel as the tribe of His inheritance. More hope, more promise of restoration for Israel. Cycle 7 is in verses 20 through 35. Again, destruction for Babylon. And then He says in verse 36, He is going to avenge Israel's cause. The 8th cycle is next, where He says in verses 37 through 48, Babylon will be destroyed, but Israel should not lose heart or be afraid. There's 2 more cycles to go. Number 9 is very short. It's just verses 49 and 50. He predicts Babylon's downfall, and He tells Israel to remember Him. Even though they will be in exile, they should think towards Jerusalem. And then we come to cycle 10, the final one, and it's different. In verses 51 through 58, God concludes with a message of destruction for Babylon. No surprise there. Every single one of the 10 cycles has started that way. But this time, there's no message for Israel. The focus is entirely on Babylon. And we see that that is the primary theme, that God will right what has been wronged. Now, the chapter concludes in verses 59 through 64 with a brief historical note that Jeremiah is instructing that this poem, which is all of chapters 50 and 51, should actually be taken to Babylon and read in Babylon. It's a final act of prophetic drama right in the center of this powerful nation. And then he says, after the scroll is read, it should be attached to a stone and dropped into the Euphrates River. It's almost like an ancient mic drop, but it's a metaphor. He says that Babylon is sinking to its death. And so, as he's repeating this cycle of prophecy about Babylon's destruction and Israel's restoration, God drives home the message. He is not done. Sure, the people can look all around them and assume that the great history of the nation of Israel is over. But with God, what appears to be the end is not necessarily the end. With God, there is always hope. My son and daughter-in-law kept putting in offers 4 houses on sale. We kept praying. They kept praying. And a couple of months ago, we got a text from them in our family group chat saying this: we got a house. 16 people put offers in on the house, and they were selected. It's a beautiful house, and we couldn't be happier about how God has blessed them. Now, I'm not saying that God will bless all of us all the time, no matter the situation, and that's what I mean by God being a God of hope. Instead, hear what God says to the nation of Israel. He is for us. Turn our hearts to Him. Look to Him in the midst of our difficulty, and we have a God who cares, a God who restores, who forgives our sin. There is hope in God. It might not mean that our physical circumstances change on the timetable that we want them to. We all know that one day we'll die. But we have hope in a God who loves us. He wants us to experience His abundant and flourishing life now, as well as eternal life in heaven. So I encourage you, what can it look like for you to place your hope in Him? Thank you.